10 days. The prince gave her 10 days to provide proof that the witch was in the palace. The girl had to remember that her life was still at stake. The girl was very short of 10 days, so she asked to be given a month. But the prince was firm, he didn't want to give her more than 10 days. Only a little while ago she was trembling with fear. But now she was no longer afraid to tear up with him. The princess replied that she had begged him then, afraid that he would kill her, but now it was different. Without her, it would be problematic for His Highness to find a witch in the palace in a short time. After she said this, the principal asked her to come over and help him put on his cloak. Ms. Yuana turned to the prince. Can he keep surveillance on her, and then can he forgive her? She asked. The prince replied that he doesn't like to lead a surveillance on someone. Leaning towards her, he said that he gives her 10 days and another one. After that, the prince turned around and went to his chambers. Han Moli wanted to clarify some information and asked His Highness if she needed information about the witch. Promptly, the prince replied that he would give her access to the library. The girl had one more question for the prince. Could she take the book to her room? To which the prince replied that she had already taken one to her book. Compared to that gentle prince before, he is a completely different person now. He looks like a poisonous snake that is ready to inject venom at any second. But that seems to be his true face. And so in her room, Miss Jana began to read a book. In the 49th year of the Golden Rose Empire, witches began to appear in every corner of the mainland. People began to suffer. For many years, the witches did atrocities. They caused floods, drought, and famine. In the 52nd year, the Emperor of the Golden Empire, William Rosecat, personally led the troops. The war against the witches lasted for 3 whole years. The witches were finally crushed. And the mainland returned to stability again. But the witch who survived hid in the crowd, spreading terror and darkness. It is the 75th year of the imperial calendar, and it was the current emperor who crushed the witch. Behind the assassin is a witch who seeks revenge against the empire. Vivian doesn't seem to be connected to the witch in any way. Han Moli kept reading. Maybe she belongs to some category of witch. What about the other princesses then? And what about her herself? Pondered the girl. As the prince was walking to his room, a servant came running up to him. He told him that Miss Vivian had sent him to him. She said it was a beautiful moon today, and she would like to take a walk with him in the garden. The prince didn't even answer anything yet, but the servant fell over in horror. The prince asked him what was wrong with him, but he didn't even say anything yet. The prince turned to him. The servant asked His Highness, is he in a bad mood? The prince's face immediately changed. He apologized to the servant for scaring him. He was just thinking about other things. He was very tired today. Taking off his cloak, he gave it to the servant and asked him to give it to Vivian. It was going to be cold this night and he wouldn't be by her side. He had to send this cloak earlier, but hoped she would like it. Accepting his cloak, the servant said Miss would treasure it very much. Giving the cloak to the servant, the prince said he would hope for it very much. The next morning, all the maids were busy with very important business. They were packing luggage, packing dishes. When Miss Yuana came out of her room, she asked one of the maids, "Was His Highness going somewhere?" The maid said that His Highness was going on a sea cruise in 3 days. Miss Vivian would be going with His Highness. They will spend several days and nights on a huge ship on the high seas. The maidservant found it very romantic. But suddenly, the maid apologized to Miss Yuan. She had forgotten that her mistress, Miss Helen, had fallen into disgrace. Miss Yuana calmed her down and said it was all right. But she was thinking of something else entirely. She needs to get Vivian out, and he's only given her 10 days. And now this rascal is trying to take away her chances. After a while, we see Han Moli climbing through the window into Helen's room. The princess was very surprised at this appearance of her maid. She asked Miss Yuan Na not to enter through the window again as it was dangerous. But she began to be reassured by her maid. She was locked in this room. Only the person bringing her food can enter her chambers. She doesn't have to worry about her since her room is right next to hers. Then Han Moli saw the sheets that had fallen near the princess. She picked them up and started reading. It was a letter from her brother. It said that her 5 brothers were the injured ones. The older brothers were desperate to save them, but they lacked funds. They asked for alms from His Highness the Prince of the Golden Rose Empire. Helen was very upset as she was now under suspicion and could not go near His Highness. Han Moli remembered the original fairy tale and asked Miss Helen, "What is her relationship with her brothers?" The princess revealed that her brothers were cursed and turned into swans. Before moving to the palace, she lived with her brothers. She must help them. Miss Yuan Na informed Helen that His Royal Highness was going abroad by sea. If she sailed too, she could ask for His Highness's help. But Miss Helen sadly replied that she could not even leave the room. To help her mistress, Miss Yuan Na came to His Highness. She asked him to take Miss Helen and her on a sea voyage. But the king suspected that she was keeping something from him. So he asked her not to hesitate, for it was just the 2 of them in the room. Miss Awana thanked His Highness for his frankness and said that she too would speak frankly. She needs to prove the identity of the witch. She can't investigate if he is going to travel with Vivian. Since she is Miss Helen's maid, she hasn't noticed strange about her. Anything is possible because the witch is closer than His Highness thinks. The prince understood Awana's hint. He realized she was talking about Vivian. If she didn't suspect Vivian, she would have no reason to sail the sea with him, the prince replied. So he allowed her to join Helen on the voyage with them. The girl was very glad, and ran at once to Miss Helen to please her with this information. But she was stopped by the prince. He asked her to change the water in all the flowers in his room. As he has. There are no maids available at the moment, so she must do it. Han Moli immediately set about the job as her future life depended on it. On the seashore, we see a beautiful woman walking along the shore. The servant behind her asked her. Her beauty could be compared to the most beautiful waves on the sea. But why is she so obsessed with that man? The girl replied that she wanted to be free as a bird. 3 days later, the ship moved out of the harbor. Since Helen was still in disgrace, the prince didn't make much preparation for her departure. Helen was only allowed to take Yuan Na as her maid. That was the end of all her privileges. When they went into their room, they were not happy. The room was perfectly situated next to her mistress. She set about unpacking her luggage first. Miss Helen apologized to Joanna for not being able to do anything without her help. Miss Jana asked her to take advantage of this trip to get closer to His Highness. She was sure he would not refuse her request to help her brothers. These words greatly encouraged Miss Helen, so she would try her best. The next day, she and Helen wanted to go to see His Highness, but they were stopped by Miss Vivian's maid. She said that she and the prince were having a tea party right now, so they should leave. Another day later, they wanted to approach His Highness again, but this time they were stopped by some servant. He said that His Highness and Miss Vivian were admiring the scenery. The prince noticed that something was happening on the deck and wanted to find out what it was. But Vivian turned to him and said it was nothing important, it looked like just a couple of noisy people. She wanted to divert his attention from the commotion, so she showed him the emerald ring he had sent her yesterday. She wanted to brag about how beautiful it was on her hand. The prince replied that the ring was nothing compared to her beauty. Kissing her hand, he said she was beautiful, so much like a witch. The girl loved that his creature was wooing her like that. His compliments are always very sophisticated. The gifts he sent her are insanely expensive. According to these gestures of love, marrying him would be easy, Vivian thought. Suddenly, as if out of nowhere, Hyland's ship appeared. The squadron commander ordered all his servants to line up quickly. This noise was noticed by Miss Helena and her maid, who were sitting in their room. They did not realize what was going on up there on the deck. On the deck of the prince's ship, Princess Charlotte of Hyland was dumbfounded. The prince turned to her. They were to meet in her country in 3 days, so what had brought her here so early? She replied that instead of tedious waiting, she preferred to take the initiative. In honor of the princess's arrival, the prince threw a festive dinner. Inviting Princess Helen and Vivian, he introduced Miss Charlotte to them. She represents Hyland and is traveling to their country as an ally. He also introduced Miss Charlotte to his 2 candidates for his princesses, Helen and Vivian. She praised the 2 princesses. Charlotte said that they are very beautiful and His Highness is very lucky to have such beautiful wives. Their beauty even makes her feel insecure. If they call her the Pearl of the Sea, how can she be insecure about her beauty? Asked the prince to her. Moving closer to him, the girl said that His Highness is very handsome. He should be very careful or she would fall in love with him. This behavior made Miss Vivian very angry. Pulling back, Charlotte apologized to Vivian. She said that she was just joking and not to let Vivian get mad at her. That I'm about Miss Helen. Iwana thought Charlotte was a new player, judging by Vivian's reaction. And then suddenly Miss Helen turned to His Highness. She hadn't seen him for so long. She wanted to tell him about her brothers and that they needed help. But no one expected this turn of events. Charlotte threw herself into the prince's arms with the excuse that there was something horrible on her plate. Vivian, Iwana and Helen were not happy about this behavior of the new princess. The prince ordered a servant to get the plate shards away from Charlotte. Iwana volunteered to help Charlotte. Charlotte was afraid that Miss Helen would not appreciate such an act by her maid. But the prince reassured her, saying that Helen was not that kind of person. This was confirmed by Helen herself. She said she didn't mind. The main thing was that she should be all right. As Joanna approached Charlotte, she noticed that the hem of Miss Charlotte's dress was dirty. She wanted to help her with it. Luckily, there weren't many grease stains on the dress. With the help of white vinegar, she cleaned it up quickly. Charlotte praised the maid. Turning to the prince, she said he was in no danger with such maids. When she finished wiping, there was not a trace left on her dress. But white vinegar has a peculiar odor and overpowers the scent of perfume. So she wanted to escort her so she could change. Charlotte wanted to have a word with the prince before she left. But to her efforts to stay with him longer, he replied that Miss Iwana would take her to the dressing room. Seeing Miss Charlotte off, Iwana was surprised. The prince seemed to understand her motive, but instead of thwarting her, he helped her. She had managed to get Charlotte away. She hoped Helen could seize the opportunity. When Helen returned to the room, Iwana began to question her. The princess told her that His Highness was willing to give His Majesty, the Emperor, a request to help her country, but he couldn't guarantee that the Emperor would agree. Since the Emperor suspects her of helping the assassins sent by the Moi to sneak into the castle. At this time, Vivian came in to see them. She turned to Helen. She needed to speak to her privately, so she asked that her maid leave the room. Anyway, Gordon's kingdom could be of help to her country as well, Vivian told her. But in return, she wanted Helen to help her get rid of Charlotte. Helen thought she wanted to kill her. To get Helen to be more serious, Vivian approached her directly. She doesn't need to play the naive fool anymore. They're players. Charlotte is a strong opponent. Even if she's not a player, this is the best opportunity to take her out before she strengthens her position. But Helen didn't want to do that. She was willing to do her another favor, but she didn't want to hurt others. She didn't want to hurt people. Vivian was not satisfied with this answer from Helen. She shouldn't be naive. Vivian decided to tell her how she had taken out the real princess on the pea. Helen was very surprised, for she thought Vivian was the princess on the pea. As she left, she said that the best choice in this situation for her was to cooperate. She should think about her proposal. To celebrate the alliance between the two countries, the prince held a dance aboard the ship. The speaker was Miss Charlotte, who had a beautiful voice that everyone loved. Prince liked her voice so much that he called her singing legendary. But Miss Charlotte noticed that Vivian didn't seem to like her singing at all. But smiling to herself, she replied that her singing was incredible. Suddenly, everyone noticed some strange woman. They thought it was Helen, but suddenly she pulled out a saber and pointed it at the prince. Here we see the events that took place half an hour ago. A servant knocked on Helen's room. The door was opened by Miss Awana because Miss Helen was resting, and she asked the servant to keep his voice down. He said that His Highness, to celebrate the alliance between the countries, would have a dance on the deck, and he called Miss Helen. The girl said she would pass these words on to her mistress. Closing the doors, Han Moli pondered. Vivian now saw a rival in Charlotte and would do something about it. But Helen had refused to help Vivian, and she could learn nothing. She is not surprised that Helen refused her. After all, she is a very kind person. Then Awana decided for herself that only she would be able to do something about it. We now return to the present. When the guards saw her pointing her sword at His Highness, they wanted to stop her, but the prince saw nothing wrong with it. He asked the guards to calm down, for he was sure Helen had no malicious intent. Unexpectedly, the girl began to dance, waving her sword. After the dance was over, she walked up to Her Highness and gave him a yellow rose. She congratulated His Highness and Highland on the formation of the alliance. Everyone else stood by the side and was very surprised. It was the first time they had seen the ball dance. They thought Miss Helen was very beautiful. The principal thanked Helen for her congratulations. She could always surprise him. This evening her dance and rose had exceeded his expectations. Turning to her, he said he was a little tired tonight, and he wouldn't mind if she accompanied him. Walking right up to her, he told her in her ear that she'd better do as he said, because he recognized it was Miss Awana. And the two of them set off away from everyone. At this time Vivian and Charlotte were left alone. The new princess turned to Vivian. She saw that Miss Vivian was very displeased. It seemed she didn't expect that Miss Helen had a trick up her sleeve. Time was very angry with Helen. She wondered if she had turned her down, but could she stand firm without her help? As she thought, she was too naive. She was firmly determined to make sure none of them left the ship alive. Meanwhile, the prince along with the Yuan had reached to the bow of the ship. He turned to her and told her she could take off her mask. There is no one here. Taking off the mask, she asked the prince. How did he recognize her? He told her that Helen would never have done such a thing and never fought like that. Even though she was an alternate princess, she very rarely showed him love. Han Moli asked him if he had called her here to persuade Miss Helen to take the initiative. But without answering her question, he gave her a rope and asked her to pull on it. He originally wanted to give it to the most beautiful princess at tonight's party. Well, alas, they got a strong competitor. She could count herself lucky tonight. After pulling the rope, she saw a beautiful sight. She saw flying fish. It was just unbelievable. While Yuan Na was admiring the sight, the prince told her that to do this, you just need to use a bait for this fish and it will swim into the net by itself. And then pull the special mechanism and the fish would jump out by itself. Awana was displeased with the prince's behavior. He spoiled the whole romantic moment. But the prince said he didn't need romantic tricks to win the maid's heart. Her 10 days are about to end. She needs to figure out how to save her life. Despite such words from the prince, the girl was still grateful to him. If she didn't find the witch and/or be killed by her, that's the most beautiful thing that she had seen before she died. After that, she changed into her maid outfit and approached Vivian. This girl was getting pretty fed up with Vivian, so if she didn't have anything important, then let them leave, Vivian said unhappily. The maid said that Miss Helen asked her to tell her that she wasn't feeling well and wouldn't be able to come to see her. If Miss Helen is seasick, Vivian offered to give her medicine. Inside the ship, when the medicines she accidentally dropped them, and ordered the maid to collect everything what had fallen to the floor. As Yuan Na was picking up the medicine, she thought it was strange. Suddenly, as she was picking it up, she saw a golden orb. Han Moli realized that she wanted to subdue it with her magic. Miss Vivian hurried the maid away. Couldn't she just pick up the medicine? Han Moli needed to distract her, so she stood up and said she'd been distracted by the guards. She was glad her Miss Vivian had shared her medicine with Miss Helen. She added afterward. So the guards wouldn't notice her magic, she'd kicked them out. And when she turned around, Miss Yuan Na kneeling gave her her golden orb. She waited for her orders. With a smirk, Miss Vivian gave her the box she was to take to Charlotte's room. Taking the box, Ms. Iwana went to her room. When she got to her room, she thought, why carry this box to Charlotte's room? Vivian is a princess from the fairy tale, the prince is a frog. According to the original story, the frog takes the balloon and returns it to the princess. Magic will definitely work on the frog, thought Han Moli as she took her rival's balloon. Shaking the box, the girl saw the emblem of the royal family on the bottom of the box. The sound in the box is as if there is a snake in there. It seems that Vivian wants to kill Charlotte with a poisonous snake. And thanks to this box, she'll blame her and Helen, so she can get rid of 2 rivals at once. Because she changed into Helen, it made Vivian make a move. She needed to finish all of this within 3 days. The next morning, she was cleaning Helen's room when she came in from her walk. And she asked her animatedly if she'd met the prince today. When she closed the door hard, she wasn't herself. She began to complain that she had said she didn't want to be involved in intrigue. Why did she pretend to be her and go to fight for the prince's attention? As she slept last night, she heard the rustling of clothes as she left. But she didn't think she was going to the prince. Today, everyone is gossiping that she was the center of attention yesterday, putting Vivian under her belt. She didn't want to go head-to-head for her goal. Jana couldn't tell Helen her intentions, but she couldn't lie to her for her own good either. She asked to be excused. Walking over to Yuan Na, Helen said that she was the only person she trusted here. She would find a way to help her brothers, but from now on she asked the Yuan Na not to act so rashly. Helen's tears and hugs seemed to envelope her. The embrace of the mistress was felt by Yuan Na. At this time, in the prince's chambers, he was sitting with Vivian and drinking morning tea. Vivian was in a very good mood today. Did something good happen to her? Asked the prince to her. The girl answered that she had heard that there was a sea snake in the sea. The longer it is hungry, the stronger its poison. Even a grown man would die in a matter of minutes. The man was a little surprised that she was interested in such things. But since she was interested, when they arrived at the palace, he promised to send her the books. She thanked the prince, but she was just afraid that this snake might be on the ship and bite her. Suddenly, the door opened and Princess Charlotte walked in. She immediately turned to Vivian. If she was interested, she could tell her about the scenery of her country. When Vivian saw her, she was puzzled. Seeing such a perplexed look on Vivian's face, Charlotte thought she didn't want her here. Charlotte didn't understand why this girl was still alive. Had her magic not worked? Or had something happened to the sea serpent? All wilted, she left her resting place at the prince's side. When she came out, Charlotte sat in the prince's arms. She asked him, "Does Miss Vivian already know that he is going to announce her as another alternate princess?" She would hate to compete with Sister Vivian. Everyone admires His Highness so much. As he approached the girl, the prince said that if he got her love, he would be the happiest man on earth. It was almost time for a kiss, but at the last moment the prince turned away. He ordered the guards to prepare the documents. The Golden Rose Empire would sign an agreement with the Highland Kingdom, and Charlotte would become its official alternate princess. Meanwhile, Vivian had already found Miss Helen's maid. She stacked the girl against the wall and asked her why she didn't do what she ordered. And she told her that yesterday she came to her senses and realized that she was standing in front of Miss Charlotte's room with a wooden box in her hands. She was so frightened that she dropped it and a snake crawled out of it. The sea snake crawled away into the sea, but she saw that the box still had traces of her nail polish on it. Vivian didn't understand why Iwana hadn't followed her orders. Had there been inaccuracies in yesterday's order that she had come to her senses in front of Charlotte's room? Vivian thought Yuna didn't know she had magic. In a gruff voice, she asked if she had told anyone about it. Yuna replied that she was just an ordinary servant. Who would she tell it to? If she wanted to survive, she should keep her mouth shut. 2 days from now at midnight, she must wait for her on the deck, along with the box. Vivian could only use magic once every 3 days. Looks like she can't even rely on her own magic anymore. So she'd have to solve all the problems herself. The next day, Charlotte was announced as the alternate princess. 2 days later, Yuan waited for Vivian on the deck. And when Vivian approached her, she asked her to hand her a box, and as if by accident dropped her golden ball. Of course she asked the maid to pick it up for her. The prince was watching from the window. It seems Han Moli had arranged for him to see Vivian using magic beforehand. Sitting by the window with a mug of tea, he read the note. "Miss Vivian and I will meet for me to deliver to her the evidence that proves her involvement in the attempt on the lives of the other princesses. We're meeting on the back deck at midnight tonight. I'll have evidence pointing to the witch. Please be there." Witch or not, Vivian tried to kill Charlotte. But the Gordon Kingdom is not weak, and to accuse Vivian you need hard evidence, pondered the prince, watching what was happening through the window. Iwana, who was about to take the golden orb, thought to herself. If the magic didn't work the first time, she would probably try to kill her now. The mole on her arm was already slowly heating up. After the hypnosis, it'll be like a blur. Now you can risk your life. With these words, she touched the balloon. The guards who stood with the prince saw her magic. Is Princess Vivian a witch? Had she been in the palace all this time? They began to whisper amongst themselves. But the prince told them all to be quiet. He stared at what was about to happen. Last time her magic didn't work, by chance. She was sorry she couldn't take out Helen and Charlotte with one blow. But taking out the main obstacle wasn't bad either. Vivian spoke. She ordered Yuana to jump into the sea. Since she was by the actions of Vivian's magic, she gladly obeyed her order. To prevent the death of the girl in principle, with the guards ran out on deck. They overturned the Vivian, and the prince ran to rescue Iwana. Already being underwater, the girl regained consciousness. She realized that she was now in the sea, so the Vivian had made her jump here. She hoped that His Highness had fully seen everything. If this was her fate, then she should accept it. But the prince jumped into the water after her and saved her. She was already thought to be in the other world, but after His Highness's barbed reply, she realized that she wasn't dead. If he saved seriously, then did he see everything Vivian did? Iwana asked him as well. The prince said she'd done a great job. Tomorrow, he would tell Helen that he would let her be his. Before he could say anything, a strong wave came over the ship and His Highness disappeared.